At the beginning of the movie, we see two men, Stig and Bobby, entering a town in Texas. Stig goes to sit in a diner, and meanwhile across the street, Bobby visits the bank and asks to purchase a safety deposit box. After that, Bobby joins Stig in the diner, who playfully flirts with the waitress. Bobby tells him to make the move and Stig gets up and sets the diner on fire. The film then jumps to 3 weeks earlier and we see Bobby and Stig in Golden, Mexico. Bobby goes to meet up with his friend Toro, but upon arriving, finds Toro's head in a bag. After that, he goes to meet Papi Greco, who is a notorious drug lord. He hands Papi some bootleg passports and in return, Papi hands over a bunch of cash, disappointing Bobby. Bobby says that he was hoping for some drugs in return, but Papi refuses to deal drugs. After finding out that Toro was betraying him and having him killed, he now does not trust Bobby either. Bobby returns the cash and tells Papi to let him know when he's interested in doing a drug deal, leaving the passports with him. Papi tells Bobby that he wants a '63 Impala convertible and Bobby agrees to drive it across the border into Mexico for him. The scene then shifts to Stig, who's hanging out with Greco's men who have put some chickens into the ground to shoot them. Stig taunts them for having atrocious aims and after being provoked, proves to them how good his aim is by blowing off the heads of the chickens. Stig then leaves with Bobby as they start to get back to America. On the way, Stig proposes that they rob the bank where Greco keeps his money, but Bobby isn't too hot on the idea. They reach the border but are quickly apprehended by the police and taken in to be questioned in different rooms. There it is revealed that Bobby is not a mere criminal, but an undercover D agent. He informs his superior Jessup that he was unable to get the drugs they required to convict Papi Greco. He doesn't tell Jessup about Toro's death, fearing that they will pull him back from the mission, and says that he's really close to coming through with Toro. In another room, Deb is seen trying to get Stig to talk, but he is being his usual self and tries flirting with her as well, feigning innocence. Eventually, she gets up to join Jessup in talking to Bobby. Jessup fears for Bobby's safety, but he says that he's spent the last 3 years of his life crawling through Mexican gutters and getting close to Papi. He is not going to back out now. Agent Deb also agrees with Bobby and eventually, Jessup gives him 2 more weeks. Later, Bobby and Deb are seen in bed together at a motel. Bobby tells her about Toro being dead and also told her that she can't tell Jessup about it. He says that Stig is planning on robbing the bank in Tres Cruces, Texas, and he is going to help him in order to get the safety deposit box where Greco puts his money. They can trace it back to him and prosecute Greco for money laundering and tax evasion. He says that she can bust Stig at the scene, throw him in jail for 20 years and get a medal. Finally, Deb agrees. The next day, Bobby goes to see Stig at his place and tells him that he's in on the plan to rob the bank. Stig talks about how it was suspicious that the Border Patrol was sure that they were holding drugs, and they would have if Papi had given them. It seems that Stig will confront Bobby for playing him, but he is just joking around. They then head over to Greco's house to spy on him. We get to know that every 2 weeks, Greco flies from Mexico with a briefcase full of cash and spends a week in America with his mistress and kid before returning. They watch as a man arrives to take away the briefcase, and they follow him. The man drives to the bank clearly to deposit the cash. Bobby tells Stig that he should hit up the diner across from the bank, because one should never rob a bank with a diner around that sells donuts to cops. This is the scene from earlier in the film. As Bobby heads over to open a safety deposit box, Stig visits the diner and they leave after setting it on fire. Bobby meets up with Deb again, and tells her that Stig is planning on robbing the bank tomorrow with or without Bobby, and Deb should bust them at 3:05. While Bobby leaves the motel, later on we see Stig going off to meet up with someone. This turns out to be Naval Officer Quince, who hands Stig some supplies that will help him in the robbery. And so we find out that Stig is also an undercover officer, a Navy SEAL hoping to bring down Papi. Quince tells Stig to kill Bobby and leave with the money, so that they can use it for covert operations. The next day the robbery carries out smoothly, as Stig and Bobby lock up the police in the police station and then go on to rob the bank. To their surprise, they find a lot more money than the expected $3 million. As they begin to load up the $43 million in their car, Bobby keeps looking at the time, but Deb doesn't arrive to bust them. Eventually, They load up the car and stop in the desert to discuss their next step. Bobby is about to pull the gun on Stig, but Stig beats him to it. However, instead of killing him, he only shoots him in the arm. He also finds the D badge on Bobby but doesn't know what to think, and drives away with the money. The scene then shifts to a man named Earl, who is investigating the bank about the robbery. He walks out to see the burned diner and finds it suspicious, rather than dismissing it as a coincidence. Stig takes all the money to Quince, who is not surprised to see $43 million instead of $3 million. Stig asks him about Bobby, but Quince ignores him and orders the money to be sent on to a naval base in Corpus Christi. Quince asks Stig about Bobby, who confesses to not having killed him, and then they both go to find him. Meanwhile, Bobby tries to hitch a ride, but two self-proclaimed border security officers begin to question him. He pulls out his gun and takes their vehicle. Back to Stig, he has figured out that Quince is up to no good and begins to attack the Navy men. He manages to get away, fearing for his own safety. Whereas, Bobby has found a vet to heal his bullet wound. Afterwards, he meets Deb in a hotel and confronts her for not showing up. She says that she did, but he left early, and then leaves to meet up with her boyfriend. Bobby then plans to capture Stig and goes to his place to break into it and look for information. There, Stig has a sniper aimed at his house and tries to communicate with Bobby when naval men arrive and attack them. However, Bobby and Stig are able to get away. We then see Earl again, who is questioning the vet who had treated Bobby's wound. Bobby heads over to Jessup's house to ask for help, but Earl is waiting for him there, having invaded Jessup's house. He attacks Bobby and asks him about his money, but Bobby acts innocent. So Earl shoots Jessup with a gun that has Bobby's fingerprints on it. Bobby is now in a deep mess. Bobby drives up to Greco's house the next morning and pulls out his gun on him. But just then, Stig arrives and takes over. He forces Greco into his own car and manages to run away from Bobby. Bobby chases them and they eventually get into a fight in the middle of the desert. The two of them decide to cool it off, and Bobby asks who Stig is, and so the two of them officially introduce themselves to each other. They now decide to work together and take Papi to Deb's garage to interrogate him. They ask him about the money and he reveals that Earl is a Black Ops operative Greco reports to, and the money they stole was the CIA's payments. The agency has forced Greco and other cartels to pay a 7% cut in exchange for using CIA planes to smuggle products across the border. The garage is attacked by Quince's hit squad. Bobby, Stig, and Deb escape, as does Papi, who calls his crew. Bobby begins to suspect Deb, wondering how they knew about Deb's house, but all three are attacked and captured by Papi and taken to his farm in Mexico. Stig and Bobby get a beating, until Stig reveals that the money is at a naval base. Greco gets a visit from Earl, who tells him to raise his cut and leaves. Greco decides to keep all the money for himself and gives Stig and Greco the task of recovering the money, or else he will kill Deb. Stig and Bobby are sent to Mexico, where they steal a van to enter the naval base. Stig tells Bobby how he met Quince at a hotel, and there he had found out where the money was going to go. Bobby recognizes the name of the hotel, being the same one he had met up with Deb in, where Deb had said she was going to meet her boyfriend. Stig and Bobby continue on to force their way into the base, and Stig drops off Bobby at Quince's office while he goes to meet the head officer, Admiral Toei. He reveals everything to the guy, who tells Stig that there was no such mission assigned to him by the Navy. Stig figures out that this was Quince's plan all along and asks the Admiral for help. The Admiral refuses to help, and protects Stig but orders Quince's arrest. Meanwhile, Bobby had gone to confront Quince and finds out that he is Deb's boyfriend. Quince opens his safe to show he doesn't have the money, and Bobby figures that the money must be hidden with Deb. The base then tries to capture Bobby, but he disguises himself as a naval officer by stealing a uniform and walks out after creating a blast for distraction. The 24 hours being up, Greco calls Bobby about the money even though Deb tells him that he won't be able to find it. Bobby tries to protect her by saying that he has it, but Greco goes on to shoot her. Bobby goes home to find Deb's body there, and comes to realize where the money must be. He goes to the motel they had frequented and finds all the money under the mattress. Meanwhile, Stig had turned up at Greco's farm to get revenge. When Quince arrives, He and Greco decide to split the money and kill Stig, but Earl joins the party and demands his money. Before it can be revealed that Stig doesn't have it, Bobby turns up in a '63 Impala with all the money. He hands the key to Earl but then proceeds to blow up the car, triggering a shootout. During a standoff, Earl reveals that the CIA has 20 other secret banks and the loss of the $43 million is only a minor setback. Signaling Stig with a phrase from an earlier conversation, Stig shoots Earl and Bobby shoots Quince. Bobby and Stig kill Papi, and the duo escape, but first Bobby shoots Stig in the leg, as payback for shooting him in the desert. While planning to continue taking down the CIA's secret banks and sabotage their black operations, Bobby reveals to Stig that he did not blow up all the money. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.